coverage of the homecoming of 3 of the 9 crew members on board the International Space Station. At this hour here in the flight control room here in Houston, the Orbit 2 team is on console, led by Flight Director Tony Sacacci, joined on console at this hour by spacecraft communicator Christy Birtles. They will be conducting a handover about an hour from now to the next team of flight controllers, led by Flight Director Brian Smith, who will work in tandem with a Russian flight control team half a world away at the Russian Mission Control Center on the outskirts of Moscow in the town of Korolyov to supervise the homecoming of Gennady Padalka, the off-going Expedition 44 commander, and 2 visiting crew members, European Space Agency astronaut Andreas Mogensen and Kazakh cosmonaut Aydin Aimbetov, who launched to the International Space Station just 10 days ago, with Russian cosmonaut Sergei Volkov delivering a fresh Soyuz vehicle to the international outpost. The 3 crew members who are in fact returning today constitute a crew that has been working diligently over the past 8 days since Mogensen, Aimbetov, and Sergei Volkov arrived on board the International Space Station. Gennady Padalka, who you see in this headshot on your screen, returns home today after 168 days in space, the world's most experienced space flyer. He will have accumulated 879 days in space on his 5 flights, the most by any human being, 76 days more than Sergei Krikalev, who will become number 2 on the all-time endurance list. In fact, Padalka surpassed him for most days in space by any human being back on June 28th. Padalka, as we mentioned, will have spent 168 days in space during Expeditions 43 and 44. During that time, since he launched with Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko back on March 28th, Padalka will have logged 2,688 orbits of the Earth during his 2 expeditions on board the station during this particular flight, and a total of 71.1 million statute miles. For Mogensen and Aimbetov, they will each have spent 10 days in space, 8 days on the International Space Station, logging 160 orbits of the Earth and an aggregate total of 4,232,000 statute miles. When they depart the International Space Station with their undocking scheduled at 4:29 p.m. Central Time, a little less than 4 hours from now, Expedition 45 will officially begin under the command of NASA astronaut Scott Kelly, who actually took command of the International Space Station during a ceremony last Saturday in which Gennady Padalka handed over command of the station to Kelly. So a few bonus days as commander of the International Space Station. Kelly will continue not only as commander of Expedition 45, which officially begins with the undocking of the Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft later this afternoon, but also he will continue as the commander of Expedition 46 until he returns home next March 3rd, with Mikhail Kornienko wrapping up a year aboard the International Space Station. And to put it into perspective, when Scott Kelly lands next March 3rd, he will have accumulated 522 days in space on 4 flights at the time of his homecoming next March 3rd. For Andreas Mogensen and Aydin Aimbetov, the 2 visiting crew members, their journey to the International Space Station began 10 days ago with their launch along with Sergei Volkov atop a Soyuz booster from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. That launch occurring at 10:37 a.m. Baikonur time on September 2nd. 37 a.m. Baikonur time on September 2nd, which was 11:37 p.m. Central Time on the night of September 1st. The Soyuz booster climbed gracefully off the launch pad at Site 1 of the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on a flawless ascent to orbit, depositing the brand new Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft into orbit less than 9 minutes later. It took 2 days for this crew to reach the International Space Station, a deliberately designed 34-orbit rendezvous profile. The docking on September 4th to the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the International Space Station's Russian segment was flawless. Volkov delivering a pristine spacecraft to the Poisk module. That Poisk docking port had been vacated just 2 weeks ago when Scott Kelly, Mikhail Kornienko, and Gennady Padalka donned their Sokol launch and entry suits, entered the Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft, and did a quick fly around to the station to find a new parking place, moving their Soyuz vehicle, the older of the Soyuz vehicles, from the Poisk module to the aft end of the Zvezda service module, where it resides at this hour and is in current preparation for its undocking just about 3 hours and 40 minutes from now. There you're seeing the replay back on September 4th, just a week ago, of the arrival of the Soyuz vehicle, the brand new TMA-16M, that will be the ride home for Scott Kelly, Mikhail Kornienko, and Sergei Volkov next March 3rd. The hatches opened about 2 hours or so after that docking, and there you see Volkov floating into the International Space Station, greeted by his Russian colleagues and Scott Kelly, as well as Kimia Yui and Chel Lindgren, the rest of the expedition crew on board the station. Volkov was followed by Andreas Mogensen and Aidin Aimbetov, the two visiting crew members, who have been quite busy over the course of the last 8 days conducting numerous experiments, particularly Mogensen, who has been basically locked up inside the Columbus module, the European module of the International Space Station, conducting a host of experiments in an extraordinarily busy timeline of scientific research that he has carried out since he arrived on board the station on September the 4th. It wasn't just all work for the crew on board the International Space Station. Earlier this week, they had an opportunity to join together for a joint meal as all 9 crew members gathered aboard the station for an opportunity to commiserate about their activities on board the station and enjoy a meal together. You see Aimbetov right there in the middle of your screen, Scott Kelly with the glasses talking, the commander of the International Space Station, Mogensen on the left, in the background Mikhail Kornienko, who was Kelly's one-year crewmate on board the station. On the far right, Gennady Padalka, the off-going commander of the station, who again will land later today on the steppe of Kazakhstan, having accrued 879 days in space on his 5 flights, including 4 as space station commander. Sergei Volkov on the far left-hand side of your screen, now well into the 3rd flight for him on board the International Space Station, will be the Soyuz commander next March 3rd, who will bring home Kornienko and Kelly as they wrap up their year on board the orbital laboratory. About an hour or so ago, Padalka was inside the Soyuz spacecraft beginning to activate its systems. The crew will shortly be saying farewell to one another in the traditional farewell activities, in which they'll bid goodbye to one another. Padalka, Mogensen, and Aimbetov then making their way inside their Soyuz spacecraft to close the hatch, conduct leak checks, and to don their Sokol launch and entry suits prior to their undocking. That will take place again at 4:29 p.m. Central Time this afternoon. Just a note, we do not expect to have live downlink television at the time of the farewells and the hatch closure. It will be out of range of our tracking and communications satellites at that time. We do expect to get a replay of all of that around the bottom of the hour, around 1:30, 1:35 p.m. Central Time, once those hatches have been closed. And we will stick with our coverage through the time of the replay of the farewells and the hatch closure.
So 1800, what are the minutes of the hatch closure? So about 18, about 13 or 15. So that is when we're supposed to start receiving the telemetry. Okay, copy. We'll do it.
Yesterday, a contingent of a dozen Russian Mi-8 helicopters comprising the Russian Search and Recovery Forces, Rosaviatsia as they are known, along with a contingent of European Space Agency personnel, flew those helicopters from the staging city in Karaganda, Kazakhstan, to the forward staging point in the town of Zhezkazgan, which is about 90 miles to the southeast of the intended landing site for the Soyuz vehicle this evening. They overnighted in Zhezkazgan. Right now in Kazakhstan, it's just before midnight. Those helicopters will be deployed before dawn to fly to the landing site and arrive in a racetrack pattern around the landing zone, where they will await the arrival of the Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft and its 3 occupants. The landing in Kazakhstan under the parachutes that you are familiar with seeing for Soyuz landing operations. Right now, the landing is scheduled at 7:51 and 20 seconds p.m. Central Time, which will be 6:51 and 20 seconds a.m. in Kazakhstan, about 2.5 minutes before sunrise locally. The weather forecast provided to us a short time ago by the Spaceflight Meteorology Group calls for winds out of the northwest at about 15 miles an hour, overcast conditions with a overcast cloud ceiling at about 10,000 feet. Visibility will be about 7 miles. A light rain shower or two will be in the vicinity, mainly of the distant northeast. The temperature at landing time expected to be in the mid-60s Fahrenheit, so virtually ideal conditions, although the visibility might be a bit poor for tracking the Soyuz during its descent under its parachute until it arrives very close to the landing site itself. All of the activity will start with the deorbit burn of the, or rather, I should say, with the undocking of the Soyuz vehicle from the aft port of the Zvezda service module that you see in this animation. That will occur at 4:29 p.m. Central Time this afternoon. The Soyuz will move to a distance of about 12 kilometers away from the International Space Station, where its engines will be commanded to ignite at 6:59 and 7 seconds p.m. Central Time. A 4-minute, 42-second braking maneuver to slow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit. The 3 sections of the Soyuz will pyrotechnically separate at 7:26 p.m. Central Time, with the crew inside the center section, the descent module. Its heat shield will then repel temperatures that will raise to about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit as it barrels toward the landing site in Kazakhstan. The command to open up the parachutes will be delivered by computer at 7:37 and 7 seconds p.m. Central Time, slowing the Soyuz down. First drogue chutes will deploy, then the main parachute, and then just a moment or two before landing, the soft landing engines will fire, and the Soyuz will touch down, with landing again scheduled at 7:51 and 20 seconds p.m. Central Time. The predicted coordinates for landing: 47.21 degrees north latitude, 69.34 degrees east longitude, and that will put the Soyuz down in the prime landing site about 90 miles to the southeast of the remote town of Zhezkazgan. Here in the flight control room in Houston, you're looking at a view from the balcony camera overlooking the Russian flight control room in Korolyov outside of Moscow. The flight director in charge of Soyuz operations throughout the rest of the day today is Yuri Krasnik. He will be working in tandem with the flight control team here in Houston as we take a poll of all of the station systems prior to the undocking of the Soyuz vehicle that will enable it to back away for its eventual deorbit and landing to bring home Gennady Padalka, Andreas Mogensen, and Aidin Aimbetov. As mentioned, the contingent of Russian and European Space Agency personnel who are pre-staged in the town of Zhezkazgan and who will board the variety of Russian helicopters to fly to the landing site in a few hours from now. The landing will be handled a bit differently in terms of the return of the crew than is typically the case when a NASA astronaut is on board. And this is all because of the presence on board of Aidin Aimbetov, only the third Kazakh cosmonaut to fly in space. He will be landing for the end of his 10 days in space, 8 days of which have been spent on the International Space Station, to a hero's welcome in his native Kazakhstan. Once the crew is verified to be hale and hearty at the landing site, the Gagarin cosmonaut training aircraft, the GCTC aircraft that flies the cosmonauts home to their training base in Star City outside of Moscow, it is positioned in Karaganda, which is the main staging city for tonight's landing operations. That GCTC plane will take off after the crew is verified to be in good shape at the landing site and will fly about 30 minutes to the capital of Kazakhstan, Astana, where it will pre-stage and join a European Space Agency aircraft that is already in the capital city of Astana at the airport. The crew will board 3 different Mi-8 helicopters. They will fly about 2.5 hours from the landing site to the capital of Astana, where they will be greeted by Kazakh President Nursultan Nazarbayev for a welcoming ceremony before Padalka and Aimbetov board that GCTC plane to fly back to Chkalovsky Airfield outside of Star City. And Andreas Mogensen will board the European Space Agency aircraft to fly with his support team back to the European Astronaut Center. So that's the way things will unfold after the Soyuz has landed, after the crew has had an opportunity to get its land legs back a bit, to go into the medical tent for initial medical tests, and then fly to the capital of Kazakhstan, Astana, for that presidential welcoming ceremony that will take place very, very late tonight U.S. time in the mid-morning hours in Kazakhstan on Saturday morning. So on board the International Space Station, the crew members are in the process of preparing to say farewell to one another. As mentioned, we have no downlink TV capability at this moment. We will be regaining that capability about 30 minutes from now, at which time we hope to have a replay of the farewells and the hatch closing that will start the clock ticking toward the undocking of the Soyuz TMA-16M from the aft port of the Zvezda service module, undocking again, scheduled at 4:29 p.m. Central Time, 5:29 p.m. Eastern Time. That will start the trip home for Padalka, Mogensen, and Aimbetov, and they're landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan at 7:51 p.m. Central Time, 8:51 p.m. Eastern Time this evening. You are seeing all of our coverage times for the rest of the afternoon and the evening. We'll be back on the air at 4 p.m. Central Time for the undocking coverage. And again, as mentioned, undocking at 4:29 p.m. Central Time this afternoon. The hooks will be commanded to open that have held this Soyuz in place since its relocation from the Poisk module to the aft port of the Zvezda service module 2 weeks ago. Springs on both sides of the docking interface will push off against one another, and the Soyuz will back away from the aft port of Zvezda. There will be an engine firing just 3 minutes after physical separation to increase the separation rate about 12 kilometers away from the station for the firing of its engines at 6:59 and 7 seconds p.m. Central Time this evening. A 4-minute, 42-second retrograde blow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit for its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere, targeting a landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan at 7:51 p.m. Central Time this evening. At this hour, the International Space Station and its 9 occupants, at least for the time being, flying from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator, currently 250 statute miles over the capital of Indonesia, Jakarta. All station systems are in excellent shape. Again, an extraordinarily busy 8 days it has been with the 9 crew members on board the station. Scott Kelly, the commander of the International Space Station, as he will be now until his departure after a year in space to head home with Russian cosmonaut Mikhail Kornienko next March 3rd, and with Sergei Volkov, who launched to the station just 10 days ago, delivering the brand new Soyuz TMA-16M vehicle that docked to the Poisk module of the International Space Station. The other 3 crew members on board the station, Russian cosmonaut Oleg Kononenko, Japanese astronaut Kimiya Yui, and NASA astronaut Kjell Lindgren, who arrived at the International Space Station back in July. So for the moment, 3 Soyuz vehicles and 1 Progress resupply ship all docked to the International Space Station. The next Progress resupply ship is being prepared in Baikonur for its launch on October 1st on a single-day launch-to-docking profile, a 4-orbit profile that will carry some 3.5 tons of supplies to the International Space Station.
Apa. Az, hogy most az Elon Musk mit mondott, hogy lehetne gyorsan felmelegíteni a Marsot. Atomomákat dobni a sarkokra.
So we are continuing to wait for word from the crew about their farewells and the entrance into the TMA-16M spacecraft by Padalka, Mogensen, and Einbetov. Once they enter the Soyuz spacecraft, the hatches will be closed between it and the Russian segment, the Zvezda service module of the International Space Station. The crew at that point will begin leak checks at the interface between the Soyuz and the station. Station crew will do the same on its side of the interface. The crew on board the Soyuz will work in tandem with the remaining station crew members to depressurize that interface vestibule, the small passageway between Zvezda and the Soyuz, down to vacuum, before the Soyuz crew begins their pre-undocking preparations, taking water and salt supplements, donning their gravity suits, and then their Sokol launch and entry suits that will guide them through their hour-long descent back into the Earth's atmosphere and a landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan. The station will be back up to a 9-person crew on December 15th, after the next trio of residents to fly to the International Space Station is launched. They will go into yet another so-called direct handover period for a week. That next crew that will be launching on December 15th, comprised of Russian cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko, NASA astronaut Tim Kopra, and European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake, who will become only the second Brit to fly in space. They will dock to the station on December 15th. Again, that'll put 9 crew members on board the station for a 1-week period until Oleg Kononenko, Kjell Lindgren, and Kamiya Yui return home on December 22nd to wrap up their 5 months on board the International Space Station. The launching of the visiting crew members, Mogensen and Einbetov, along with Sergei Volkov, who has joined as an expedition crew member for the next 6 months on board the complex. The necessity to launch this visiting crew in a brand new Soyuz vehicle was required to deliver a fresh Soyuz spacecraft for Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko to ride home on. The Soyuz vehicle they launched on back on March 28th to begin their 1-year mission on board the station is the ride home today for Padalka, who flew up with Kelly and Kornienko, and the ride home for the 2 visiting crew members, Mogensen and Einbetov. The Soyuz TMA-16M has been aloft now for about 168 days. The Soyuz spacecraft typically have a lifetime of about 210 days or so in orbit. The Russian flight controllers like to bring Soyuz vehicles home at about the 200-day mark, so this was the appropriate time to deliver the fresh Soyuz vehicle and a fresh expedition crew member, Volkov, to the station to join the Expedition 45 crew. Again, Expedition 45 officially begins at the time of the Soyuz undocking that is scheduled to take place at 4:29 p.m. Central Time this afternoon.
Az, ami körülbelül egy körül lesz maga a landolás.
This is Mission Control Houston. Once again, you're looking at a view from a balcony camera overlooking the huge ISS Flight Control Room at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside of Moscow, where the Russian Flight Control Team is standing by for further word from the crew members on board that they have completed saying goodbye to one another, with Padalka, Mogensen, and Einbetov having moved into the Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft to begin their pre-undocking preparations. The entrance of the crew into the Soyuz vehicle will begin the significant portion of the pre-undocking preparations, in which the hatches will be closed, leak checks will be conducted to ensure a tight seal between the Soyuz and the aft port of the Zvezda service module to which the TMA-16M is attached.
The hatch is closed.
And we've just received confirmation here in the flight control room that the hatch is closed. So the crews have in fact said goodbye to one another. The hatch is closed at 1:17 p.m. Central Time. Padalka, Mogensen, and Einbetov are now inside the Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft. Again, hatch closure marked at 1:17 p.m. Central Time, 2:17 p.m. Eastern Time.
MCC Moscow, this is Soyuz crew. How do you read us? We pretty loud and clear as well. We closed the hatches.
So the first step on the road home now complete for Padalka, Mogensen, and Einbetov with the closing of the hatch to the TMA-16M. As we mentioned before, we're out of range of our tracking and communications satellite for a downlink video capability at the moment. We should get that back about 15 minutes or so from now. The next step for the crew will be the continuing activation of Soyuz systems, and then the start of the depressurization of the vestibule that links the Soyuz, the small passageway between the Soyuz and the Zvezda service module.
I think we had a footnote in the radiogram concerning this. We had it in the radiogram. Okay, we're going to perform steps per page 8686.
Принято.
Copy.
мы уже все выдали. Закончили, стало открываем.
We have sent
Проконтролирую, люки закрыты.
all the commands. We have monitored all the hatches are closed.
Открыли мы РПВ, включаем
We
питание.
have opened the RPV. We're activating power for KSD.
Открыли мы ПКРД вручную. Здесь подача 2. Как принял?
We have opened GARDE manually. Completed steps on page 86. I'll copy.
This is Mission Control, Houston, as we begin a handover between the Orbit 2 and 3 flight control teams here in the U.S. Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. We can tell you once again that the hatches are closed between the Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft and the International Space Station. Gennady Padalka has occupied the center seat of the Soyuz spacecraft, flanked on his left by visiting crew flight engineer number 1, Andreas Mogensen of the European Space Agency, and on his right, Aydin Aimbetov of Kazakhstan, the visiting crew flight engineer number 2. Mogensen and Aimbetov in the same seat configurations for them as they were for launch 10 days ago, with Sergei Volkov from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on a different Soyuz spacecraft, the 18M, which is now currently parked at the Poisk module of the International Space Station, where it will remain until Volkov, Scott Kelly, and Mikhail Kornienko ride home on it next March 3rd to wrap up the year-long mission for Kelly and Kornienko on board the International Space Station. Soyuz systems are in the process of being activated, and shortly leak checks will be conducted at the vestibule, the interface, the docking interface between the Soyuz and Zvezda, to ensure that we have a tight seal before that vestibule or the passageway is depressurized to vacuum, as the important step prior to the undocking of the Soyuz from Zvezda that is scheduled at 4:29 p.m. Central Time this afternoon. As mentioned a few minutes ago, we do not have a live television downlink capability from the station. We're expecting to regain that about 10 minutes from now, and hopefully we'll be receiving a replay of the crews saying farewell to one another and then getting prepared to enter the Soyuz spacecraft. The hatches were closed at 1:17 p.m. Central Time, 2:17 p.m. Eastern Time. In the remote town of Jezkazgan, Kazakhstan, which is just to the northwest of the intended landing site for Padalka, Mogensen, and Aimbetov, it is just about 12:27 a.m. Kazakhstan time on Saturday morning. Several hours from now, the Russian search and recovery forces, known as Rosaviatsia, along with a contingent of European Space Agency support personnel, will be awake and preparing to board a dozen Russian Mi-8 helicopters that will take off from Zhezkazgan. 8 helicopters will be deployed to the prime landing site about 90 miles to the southeast of Zhezkazgan. 2 of those helicopters will reach the midway point between the prime landing site and the so-called ballistic landing site that would be employed in the unlikely event the Soyuz would fall short of its intended landing target. 2 additional helicopters and the contingent of a dozen Russian Mi-8 helicopters will be deployed near Baikonur, Kazakhstan, at the point where the ballistic landing would occur if that should become necessary. At the prime landing site, in addition to the 8 prime Russian Mi-8 helicopters, will be a quartet of all-terrain vehicles and a Russian Antonov fixed-wing aircraft that will serve as a flying command center to relay voice and data communications between the Soyuz spacecraft and the Russian flight control team at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside Moscow as the Soyuz approaches the landing site underneath its huge orange and white parachute.
Just folder. Copy. Do you need to downlink anything from NASA stream?
Миша, как принял?
Misha, how copy?
Еще повторите, пожалуйста.
Could you repeat again, please?
Мы галочку ставили на стрим ТВ. Там какой-то файл сформировался. Нам ее сбрасывать или...
The file was generated in NASA Stream TV. Do we need to place it anywhere for downlink? Stand by 1.
Выдали мы КС-2, закрыли мы КС-2 ИСУ.
We sent F2. We closed KSDSU.
Открываю люки.
Closing the bell hatch.
Зафиксирую по монометрометру, скажу тебе, сколько там у нас.
I will look at the manual pressure gauge pressure reading and I will report it to you.
I think that's Canada there.
ISS MCC Moscow
Oh, is
Space
that not
Ground 1
right?
for
Something.
Oleg.
Or clouds. That disappeared from your
Go ahead.
face.
Да, можно закрывать.
Yes, you can close it.
Нет, закрыть закроем. Видео мы с него не сбрасываем.
So we will close it, but we're not going to download the video. Correct?
Периодически файл, который стрим ТВ записываем, спрашивайте нас сбросить.
So you're on a regular basis requesting to have the file placed
Oh,
from
that's actually
Stream
Alaska.
TV placed for downlink. So that is why we're asking if this is what you need us to do right now. Okay, send by 1. We'll check.
Station is currently flying over in the area of Alaska. That might be the Aleutians or something. I'm not that good at guessing.
This is Mission Control Houston, courtesy of the HDEV camera, the high-definition external viewer camera on the International Space Station. A spectacular view that you saw a moment ago as the station was passing at the apex of This orbital pass about to move from northwest to southeast, just south of the Kamchatka Peninsula of Alaska, on a pass that will take the International Space Station just to the northeast of San Francisco and across the southwestern United States a short time from now. Again, Gennady Padalka, Aydin Aimbetov of Kazakhstan, and European Space Agency astronaut Andreas Mogensen are inside the Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft. They have closed the hatches. That occurred at 1:17 p.m. Central Time a short time ago, and they're beginning preparations for the leak checks to ensure an airtight seal between the Soyuz and the Zvezda service module, to which this Soyuz is currently attached and will be for the next few hours until it undocks at 4:29 p.m. Central Time, beginning the road home for Padalka, Mogensen, and Aimbetov, setting up their landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan at 7:51 p.m. Central Time this evening, 6:51 a.m. Kazakhstan time on Saturday morning, about 2.5 minutes before sunrise.
Let's put on the HTV. Hallå.
Hajnal 1-2. És addig fenn akarsz maradni? Na, ide pedig nem raktad be a fiókba, amit fizettél?
De. Nem voltak. Még nem.
It says MCC Moscow on space to ground 1 for Oleg.
Чуть позже будет, Миш, какая информация?
Misha, he will be available a little bit later. What kind of information do you have for him?
Выполнять ТВ вброс.
You need to perform the television
Еще раз.
downlink. Could you repeat it again?
Вброс ТВ-репортажа.
You need to start the TV downlink.
ТВ-репортажа.
You're talking about the TV downlink from the card or from NASA stream?
Pécén vagy?
С карты, да.
From the card.
Примерно
Jaj, 7 és 8 állónyi közösen.
So that
A
is
kapupin
requested
de
on
azért mi az?
SCA for
Ezt ezen fel
requested
hallják, hogy mi
on
hallatszik, hogy itt.
transfer hedge closure.
М5-2 тоже увидели еще раз.
So we'd like to see it again in MPEG. You want to see the MPEG 2 as well? Yes, that is correct.
Хорошо, принято.
Okay, copy.
Julisz már megnézte, tudja? Ja, mondom, Julisz azt szokta úgy, hogy ja, ide majd beállsz ki. Hopp, majd eltenni veled, ugye? A CPC megvan?
Nem foglaltam még. Csak néztem a bótorhordba, és találtam. Szóval így. Csak
This is Mission Control Houston. Inside the Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft are Soyuz commander Gennady Padalka, the most experienced space traveler in history of human spaceflight, who will be landing a few hours from now, having logged 879 days in space on his 5 flights, 168 days on this mission that saw him play the role of Expedition 43 flight engineer and Expedition 44 commander. At the point of his landing later this evening, Padalka will have logged 76 days more in space than the previous record holder, Sergei Krikalev, who Padalka surpassed on the all-time endurance list back on June 28th. Padalka will have completed 2,688 orbits of the Earth during these 2 expeditions, a total of 71.1 million statute miles.
The hedge closure and the NASA.
Flanking Padalka in the Soyuz vehicle at this hour, on the left, Andreas Mogensen, the European Space Agency's visiting crew flight engineer, who, as he did 10 days ago for launch, will serve as the primary flight engineer alongside Padalka for this entry and landing of the Soyuz vehicle. On Padalka's right, Kazakh cosmonaut Aidin Aimbetov, visiting crew flight engineer number 2, who will be returning to his native Kazakhstan for a hero's welcome later this evening once the Soyuz touches down at 7:51 p.m. Central Time, 8:51 p.m. East, about 90 miles to the southeast of the town of Jezkazgan.
Hatch closure, and now then there's another video. Hatch closure, and now what I'm saying is placing a file is for the hatch closure for 2015 September 11. Okay, there are three files in the folder right now. Copy. Then I'll be waiting for you. I'm waiting for your broadcast of the TV recording from the card.
We are standing by in the hope that the crew on board the station will be downlinking shortly a replay of the hatch closure, their farewells to one another, and the hatch closure that took place at 1:17 p.m. Central Time this afternoon, about 26 minutes ago. The Soyuz has been placed on autonomous power. It had been feeding power off of station power systems since it was relocated 2 weeks ago, moving from the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station to the aft port of the Zvezda service module, to which it is currently attached and will be until undocking about 2 hours and 45 minutes from now.
Okay, copy, I'll understand. Okay, let me take a look.
The Poisk module is now the home for the Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft, the newer Soyuz vehicle that was launched 10 days ago from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, and which glided in for a docking 2 days after launch by Sergei Volkov along with Mogensen and Aimbetov to begin the 8-day visiting mission of the European and the Kazakh crew members. Volkov remaining on board the station as an expedition crew member. Expedition 45 officially begins at undocking a few hours from now under the command of Scott Kelly, who actually took command of the station from Gennady Padalka this past Saturday.
Москва, принимаете?
CC Moscow, I pressed the play button. Are you receiving the video?
Пока нет, сейчас проверяем.
Not yet. Let us check.
Может, мне пока на стоп нажать?
Maybe I should press stop for now. Yes. Yes, you can do that.
Так, нажал на стоп.
I press stop. CC Moscow, ISS and space to ground 1. Go ahead.
Скажи, пожалуйста, БНП вот на...
Could you tell us BNP number 19, where should I transfer it?
Информацию приняли, честно. Подготовим ответ.
Не очень тебя понял, хорошо. 19?
I didn't quite hear what you said. Number 19, where should we transfer? We're looking into that right now. Stand by one.
Заодно и с Кубендом, как устойчиво есть связь?
And also a question about KU band. Do we have stable KU band coverage? I think we're receiving it now. Just press play.
Так, есть проигрывание файла.
We're playing the file for downlink. We're not seeing the video. We're not receiving the video.
Хорошо, еще раз.
Okay, let me try pressing it again.
МКС ответит Цупов Москвы.
It says MCC Moscow on space to ground 1.
Мы не получили.
Go ahead. We are not receiving the video.
Понимаю, Миш. Дело все в том, что...
Copy all, Misha. Well, the matter is when I start NASA Stream TV, it's prompting
Если я...
confirm or not confirm. If I click ignore, then the play button is active. If I confirm and then I access the NASA Stream, then the play file becomes inactive.
Олег, добрый вечер.
Oh, good evening, Alexander Trehin. We would like you to downlink the video to us using the card. Yes, I understand.
Видео с карты чего?
A video from which card? Did you say Sony card? Yes, from the Sony card video. The one that you recorded in the viewer.
А его через что сбросить?
And which program do I use to downlink that video? I need to see.
This is Mission Control Houston. This conversation between Russian flight controllers in Moscow at the Russian Mission Control Center and Oleg Kononenko aboard the International Space Station involves the proper configuration for a replay of video that was captured about 40 minutes ago or so of the farewells and the hatch closure for the departing crew of Gennady Padalka, Andreas Mogensen, and Aydin Aimbetov, who are now inside the Soyuz TMA-16M spacecraft. They are buttoned up, conducting leak checks to make sure they have an airtight seal between the Soyuz and the Zvezda service module before the depressurization of the small passageway at the docking interface that will set the stage for the physical separation of the Soyuz from Zvezda, scheduled at 4:29 p.m. Central Time this afternoon, and the start of the road home for the trio, Padalka wrapping up 168 days in space, for Mogensen and Aimbetov 10 days in space, 8 days aboard the International Space Station. So we'll stand by for a few more minutes. If we don't get this replay within the next few minutes, we'll sign off and come back with the hope that that video will have been downlinked in time for our next broadcast, which is scheduled at 4 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, that will encompass undocking of Soyuz from the International Space Station that will mark the official start of Expedition 45. So we're standing by. And we are now getting that replay.
Video. Yes, we are receiving the video.
А почему через USB порт не проходит?
Why doesn't it work through the USB port? Like we don't know yet, but we'll try to figure it out with our US colleagues. We have not really tried that in the past, so I won't be able to give you a definitive answer right now. Okay, that's fine. But we are transmitting it. Yes, we're receiving it. Everything is good.
Again, you're seeing a replay of the final farewells between the crew, Padalka in the lighter blue shirt, Andy Mogensen of the European Space Agency, Aydin Aimbetov, the Kazakh cosmonaut, and of course a group photo there with Scott Kelly, Mikhail Kornienko, Sergei Volkov, Kimia Yui, Oleg Kononenko on the left, and Kjell Lindgren just out of the field of view at the moment. The crew posing for a final 9-crew portrait after 8 days together on board the International Space Station. Padalka, Mogensen, and Aimbetov gearing up for their high-speed entry back into the Earth's atmosphere later today, and a landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan at 7:51 p.m. Central Time tonight. Gennady Padalka there in the foreground, saying farewell to Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, who he ferried up to orbit back on March 28th on the TMA-16M to begin for them their 1 year in space. Padalka, the world's most experienced space traveler, wrapping up his 5th space flight today in a total of 879 days in space. As the departing crew moves through the hatchway into the Soyuz spacecraft, you're looking at the aft end of the Zvezda service module, the mainstay of the Russian segment of the International Space Station, which was launched in July of 2000 atop a Proton rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. NASA astronaut Kjell Lindgren documenting the activities, looking on Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Kimia Yui, Lindgren, Yui, and Oleg Kononenko, who was right there at the hatchway. They arrived on board in July. They will be departing the space station in their own right on December 22nd for a pre-Christmas landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan in their own Soyuz spacecraft.
You can leave them there. That's fine.
Ну да.
Quality is good.
Спины у нас красивые, да.
Yeah, our backs are looking good. Good quality.
Можно еще Сергея позвать?
Could you ask Sergey to call us?
Сейчас возьмет гарнитуру. Да, Михаил.
Okay, I'm going to ask him to grab the microphone. Go ahead. Yes, move Benpa to Amiram 2 and place wherever you deem more convenient.
Все, понял, спасибо.
Copy all, thank you.
And there you see the closing of the hatch between the Zvezda service module and the Soyuz TMA-16M. This replay of the activities that occurred about 45 minutes ago, with the closing of the hatch marked at 1:17 p.m. Central Time, 2:17 p.m. Eastern Time. Since then, the Soyuz has been placed on autonomous power by Gennady Padalka, the Soyuz commander, as he, Andreas Mogensen of the European Space Agency, and Aydin Aimbetov of the Kazakh Space Agency, known as Cosmos, are preparing their Soyuz vehicle for its undocking, which is scheduled 2 hours and 29 minutes from now. Oleg Kononenko, the Russian cosmonaut flight engineer, who arrived on board the International Space Station as part of Expedition 44 and is continuing on as part of Expedition 45 with the final closure of the station side of the hatch. Hatch is closed at 1:17 p.m. Central Time. The crew involved in leak checks and other systems checks. And there you see the replay having been completed of the final farewells between the crew members and the closing of the hatches. So with that complete, we'll wrap up our coverage of this portion of today's activities as well. With the replay having been completed, we'll press on to our next programming. 2 hours from now at 4 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, that will be our undocking coverage with the Soyuz undocking from the International Space Station at 4:29 p.m. Central, 5:29 p.m. Eastern Time. So once again, Padalka, Mogensen, Aimbetov aboard the TMA-16M, preparing to depart the International Space Station less than 2.5 hours from now. We'll see you back here in 2 hours at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. In the meantime, this is Mission Control Houston.
I'm Baltering 25. Goodbye.